The morning of 14 January 1945 began with a strange silence over the snow-covered fields west of Warsaw, Poland. The sky was gray. The air was so cold that every breath turned instantly into white fog. Frost
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
covered the armor of dozens of Soviet tanks waiting near the front line. Engines rumbled in the darkness before sunrise. Men tightened gloves around frozen fingers. Officers checked maps one last time. Everyone knew a major offensive was beginning. But none of them knew that before the day ended, one Soviet tank crew would find itself staring directly into the gun barrel of one of Germany's most feared weapons. Inside a T-34 85 tank sat Junior Sergeant Ivan Petrov. At 23 years old, he had already seen more combat than most men would experience in a lifetime. He had survived artillery barrages, air attacks, and tank battles stretching from Ukraine to Poland. The war had changed him. The cheerful farm boy who had left his village years earlier was gone. In his place was a tired but experienced tanker who had learned that survival often depended on a few seconds, a few meters, or a single decision. That morning, Ivan sat in the turret while the engine vibrated beneath him. The familiar smell of fuel, oil, steel, and sweat filled the cramped interior. Around him were the men he trusted with his life. Their commander, Lieutenant Nikolai Sokolov, studied the route ahead. The driver, Sergeant Mikhail Orlov, waited with his hands on the controls. The radio operator, Alexei Morozov, adjusted his headset. The loader, Viktor Lebedev, checked the ammunition one final time. These men had fought together for months. They knew each other's habits, strengths, and fears. In war, that kind of trust could mean everything. As dawn approached, Soviet artillery suddenly shattered the silence. Thousands of guns opened fire almost simultaneously. The earth trembled. Flashes lit the horizon. The roar was so powerful that it seemed to shake the sky itself. The Vistula-Oder Offensive had begun. Across miles of front line, Soviet forces surged forward. Infantry advanced behind rolling artillery fire. Tanks moved through gaps in German defenses. Entire armies pushed westward. Ivan's T-34 rolled forward with dozens of others. Snow crunched beneath the tracks. Smoke drifted across frozen fields. In the distance, artillery shells exploded among German positions. The first hours went surprisingly well. Resistance was scattered. Several German anti-tank guns were destroyed before they could fire. Abandoned vehicles lined parts of the road. The speed of the Soviet advance created growing confidence among the crews. Inside the tank, the mood became lighter. Nobody relaxed completely. They knew war could change in an instant. But after years of brutal fighting, every successful advance felt like proof that victory was finally approaching. By late morning, Ivan's unit had advanced deeper into German-held territory than expected. The landscape rolled past in shades of white and gray. Small villages appeared and disappeared behind them. Smoke rose from distant farms. Occasionally, they encountered pockets of resistance. Machine guns fired from houses. German infantry launched brief counterattacks. Each time the Soviet force pushed through. Hours passed. The crew began believing that this might be one of the easier days they had experienced in months. Then reports started arriving over the radio. At first, the messages were confusing. A tank platoon ahead had stopped responding. Another unit reported losing vehicles near a wooded area. Someone mentioned heavy armor. Another crew claimed they had seen a large German tank. The reports were incomplete and often interrupted by static. Nobody knew exactly what was happening. Lieutenant Sokolov listened carefully. His expression changed. Heavy armor could mean many things. But experienced tankers knew there was one possibility they never wanted to hear. Tiger, the name, carried weight on every battlefield. Even Soviet crews who had never seen one knew its reputation. Its armor was thick. Its gun was deadly. Its crews were often highly experienced. Although the Tiger was no longer as dominant as it had once been, it remained a dangerous opponent, especially at long range. The Soviet advance continued. Around noon, the weather began changing. Snow drifted across open ground. Visibility became worse. Trees and buildings emerged suddenly from the haze. For tank crews, this created both danger and opportunity. Long-range gunnery became difficult, but close combat became far more likely. Ivan peered through his optics. The world outside appeared fragmented. Shadows moved through blowing snow. Every shape demanded attention. Hours earlier he had felt confidence. Now a feeling he knew well returned. The feeling that danger was close. The feeling that somewhere nearby, someone was hunting. The column entered an area of scattered woods and frozen farmland. Tracks from other vehicles crossed the snow. Burned-out wrecks appeared along the route. One of them was a Soviet tank. Its turret had been blown off. Black scorch marks covered the surrounding snow. The crew inside Ivan's tank fell silent. Nobody needed to explain what they were thinking. Something powerful had destroyed that vehicle. Very powerful. The radio crackled again. This time the message was clearer. German tanks operating nearby. Possibly Tigers. Proceed with caution. The words hung inside the turret. Proceed with caution. Simple words. Difficult advice. Because offensive operations rarely allowed caution. Momentum mattered. Stopping could be as dangerous as advancing. The Soviet unit continued forward. Minutes passed. Then came another unsettling discovery. A second destroyed tank. Then a third. Each wreck appeared relatively fresh. The battle had happened recently, maybe within the last hour. Lieutenant Sokolov studied the area. The pattern worried him. The destroyed vehicles were spread across a broad section of terrain. Whoever had destroyed them had likely fired from multiple positions or controlled a large field of fire. Either possibility suggested a skilled enemy. The crew pressed onward. The afternoon light began fading. Winter days were short. Shadows stretched across the landscape. Snow continued blowing across fields. Visibility grew even worse. Then everything changed. A sudden flash erupted ahead. A Soviet tank several hundred meters away exploded. The fireball pierced the gray afternoon. For a brief second, nobody moved. Then another shot struck. Another tank burned. Radio traffic erupted instantly. Enemy armor, enemy armor, enemy armor. The battlefield exploded into confusion. Soviet tanks maneuvered. Commanders shouted orders. Engines roared. Snow flew from spinning tracks. Yet nobody could clearly identify where the enemy was located. The attackers remained hidden. Another shell slammed into a vehicle. Another explosion. The invisible hunter continued firing. Lieutenant Sokolov made a decision. Instead of stopping, he ordered the crew forward. Fast, the logic was simple. At long range, a Tiger held significant advantages. At close range, opportunities appeared. The T-34 accelerated. Snow sprayed behind it. The engine screamed. Inside the turret, every crew member felt the tension rising. The tank bounced violently across frozen ground. Ivan searched desperately through his sights. Nothing. Smoke, trees, snow, shadows, no Tiger. Then, suddenly, he saw movement. A large shape, partially concealed near a tree line. For a moment he thought it was another wreck. Then it moved. His heart raced. Massive turret. Box-like silhouette. Wide tracks. Tiger, the enemy, was real. And terrifyingly close. The range had collapsed far faster than either side expected. Instead of fighting across open fields, the tanks were rushing toward each other through poor visibility. The battlefield had become a close-range knife fight. The Tiger fired. The flash blinded Ivan for an instant. The shell missed narrowly, throwing snow and earth into the air. The shockwave hammered against the Soviet tank. Everyone inside felt it. Another few meters and the shot might have been fatal. Lieutenant Sokolov reacted immediately. The T-34 turned sharply. Driver Mikhail pushed the engine to its limits. The tank raced across uneven terrain. Speed became their greatest weapon. The Tiger began rotating its turret. Its crew was trying to track the moving Soviet vehicle. Inside the T-34, Victor loaded another armor-piercing shell. His movements were fast but controlled. Months of combat had made every action instinctive. Ivan aimed. The sight bounced violently. The target appeared, disappeared, appeared again. He squeezed the trigger. The T-34 fired. The entire tank recoiled. The shell streaked toward the Tiger. Impact, sparks erupted from the German tank. But it continued moving. The armor had held. No celebration, no relief, only more tension. The Tiger fired again. This time the shell struck nearby ground. Snow exploded upward. Fragments rattled across the Soviet tank. The crews were now engaged in one of the most dangerous forms of armored combat, point-blank tank fighting. Training manuals discussed it. Veterans feared it. Because at such distances, survival often depended on seconds. The battlefield narrowed into a deadly contest between crews. Who could reload faster? Who could aim first? Who could exploit a mistake? The Soviet tank closed even further. The range shrank dramatically. Both vehicles maneuvered aggressively. The Tiger attempted to keep its stronger frontal armor facing the threat. The T-34 sought an angle, a weakness, a chance. Ivan focused completely on the target. The rest of the world disappeared. No artillery, no radio, no battlefield, only the Tiger, only the next shot. Another shell loaded, another shot fired. Impact, more sparks. The German tank continued fighting. But something had changed. The hit appeared to affect its movement. Perhaps a track, perhaps a wheel. Nobody inside the Soviet tank knew. But any damage mattered. The Tiger responded instantly. Its gun thundered again. This time the shell struck the T-34. The impact felt like a giant hammer smashing the hull. The interior filled with noise. Metal fragments flew. Lights flickered. For a terrifying second, Ivan believed they had been destroyed. But the tank kept moving. The armor had absorbed enough of the strike to save them. The crew was alive. Shaken, but alive. Smoke drifted through the compartment. Alexei reported damage but no critical failures. The battle continued. Lieutenant Sokolov saw an opportunity. The Tiger appeared partially restricted in movement. Perhaps the earlier hit had damaged its mobility. The Soviet commander ordered an aggressive maneuver. The T-34 surged forward. Closer, closer, dangerously close. The kind of distance where every crewman could almost see faces through vision ports. You can almost feel the tension that filled both vehicles during those moments. Two crews, two tanks, two groups of exhausted soldiers, separated by little more than steel and snow, both knowing that the next few seconds might determine everything. Ivan steadied his aim. The Tiger's side became visible for a brief moment, only seconds, maybe less. He fired. The shell struck. A flash erupted. Dark smoke followed. The Tiger slowed. Its movement became uneven. For the first time, hope appeared. But hope could be deadly. Many crews had celebrated too early. Lieutenant Sokolov refused to assume victory. He ordered another shot prepared immediately. The loader worked furiously. Sweat covered his face despite the freezing weather. The shell slid into place. Ready, Ivan aimed again. The Tiger's turret was still moving. The enemy crew was still fighting, still dangerous, still capable of killing them. Another shot. Another impact. This time flames appeared, small at first, then growing. The German tank began emitting thick black smoke. The battlefield seemed to pause. Everyone watched. Seconds passed. Then, more smoke. More fire. The Tiger finally stopped moving. The duel was over. For a moment nobody spoke. Months of training, years of war. Everything had led to moments like this. The crew remained alert. Experience taught them that battlefield victories could be deceptive. A disabled tank could still fire. An unseen enemy could appear at any moment. Yet as minutes passed, it became clear. The Tiger was finished. Relief flooded through the crew. Not joy, not celebration. Simply relief. The relief of still being alive. Around them, the larger battle continued. Artillery thundered in the distance. Machine guns rattled. Engines roared. War moved on. It always moved on. As darkness approached, Soviet forces secured the area. The damaged T-34 finally halted. The crew climbed out. Cold winds struck their faces. For the first time in hours, Ivan stood on solid ground. His legs felt weak. Adrenaline slowly faded. Nearby stood the remains of the Tiger. Burned, silent, defeated, he stared at it for a long time. The machine that had terrified so many crews. The machine responsible for countless battlefield stories. Now it was simply twisted steel resting in the snow. The reality of combat often looked different from legends. Even the most feared weapons could be destroyed, but usually at a cost. The Soviet unit had lost tanks that day. Friends, comrades, men who had survived years of war only to fall during the final months. Victory never erased those losses. As evening settled over the battlefield, Ivan thought about the morning. It felt impossibly distant. Only hours earlier they had advanced with confidence. Only hours earlier the future had seemed predictable. Then, everything changed. That was war. Not maps, not arrows, not statistics. Moments. Unexpected moments. Moments when ordinary soldiers faced extraordinary danger. The Vistula-Oder Offensive continued pushing westward. Within months, Germany would be defeated. The war in Europe would end. History would remember the great offensives, the famous commanders, and the strategic victories. But for men like Ivan Petrov, history looked different. History was the freezing air inside a steel tank. History was the sound of shells striking armor. History was watching a friend survive one battle and disappear in the next. History was fear, duty, luck, and survival. Years later, veterans would speak about battles, victories, and advances across Europe. Yet many memories faded with time. Dates blurred. Distances became uncertain. Names were forgotten. But certain moments remained crystal clear. A burning horizon. The sound of a gun firing. The sight of an enemy appearing through drifting snow. For Ivan, one memory never faded. A winter afternoon in Poland. A battlefield covered in white. A Soviet crew rushing forward through confusion and smoke. And suddenly, emerging from the haze, a tiger. Not a story. Not a rumor. Not a distant silhouette. A real tiger. Close enough to kill them. Close enough to change their lives forever. The crew had entered that battle as experienced soldiers. They left it with a deeper understanding shared by countless veterans across the war. Courage did not mean feeling no fear. Courage meant continuing despite fear. It meant loading another shell when your hands shook. It meant driving forward when every instinct told you to stop. It meant trusting the men beside you when survival depended on teamwork. The tiger was gone. The battle was over. Night covered the battlefield. Snow continued falling softly across damaged tanks and frozen ground. Yet the memory remained. And perhaps that is why stories like this still matter today. Because beneath the steel, beneath the weapons, beneath the uniforms and flags, were ordinary young men facing impossible situations. Some returned home. Many did not. But on that cold January day in 1945, one Soviet crew rushed into close combat, came face to face with a tiger, and somehow survived one of the most dangerous encounters a tanker could experience. In the end, the most remarkable thing was not that they destroyed a feared enemy tank. The most remarkable thing was that after everything they had endured, after the explosions, the fear, the chaos, and the violence, they were still alive to watch the sun disappear beyond the frozen Polish horizon. And for soldiers living through the final brutal winter of the Second World War, sometimes survival itself was the greatest victory of all.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.